We're gonna go into the 4 keys behind strength training for lacrosse, and we're gonna start right now. What's up, everybody? It's Dane Miller from GarageStrength.com, and if this is your first time to the channel and you're interested in becoming a more explosive athlete, you wanna be a freak, you wanna dominate your opponents out on the pitch, make sure that you like, you subscribe, and you ring that notification bell so we can help you become a beast. So one of the most underdeveloped areas behind lacrosse-based training is actually focusing on the strength training, the resistance-based training, the training that you can do inside of a weight room, the training that you can do to drastically improve your speed, your hip mobility, your ability to cut out on the field. And one of the things that I've seen is that we've got those classic lax bros where they're just gonna go into the weight room. Maybe they're doing 90-degree back squats with 225. They're getting a huge pump. They wanna get their bis and tris to look nice and swole, and they wanna feel really good. They want those shredded abs. But they're basically just doing a bastardized sports performance program that's mainly focused almost entirely on bodybuilding. And then you've got the other camp that we don't wanna lift too much, we don't wanna slow down, we don't wanna get big and bulky, we don't wanna be those guys that really struggle to have good speed. We have to start to break down what is it exactly that lacrosse players need. Because when I'm looking at lacrosse, when I'm looking at the sport out on the field, I'm starting to see a lot of similarities between sports like field hockey, even shot put, movements where there's a lot of rotation, there's a ton of speed, there's an odd object that you have to run with, there's shoulder pads, so it's similar in some instances to even football. And so we start to see that there's a lot of similarities. And that takes us immediately into that 4th key element. When you're talking about lacrosse, you have to actually focus on strength endurance. And that's one big factor, is that one of the misconceptions I had early on was that I wanted to train lacrosse players similar to how I would train linebackers. I wanted to train them almost like a middle linebacker. And maybe there's specific positions that might actually hold suit. I'm thinking about specifically for a goalie, right? That actually might be beneficial. But for most positions on the lacrosse field, I believe that you can start to look at it like a free safety, maybe a cornerback, but it's typically a free or a strong safety, someone that's gonna have really, really good speed, but still have really good endurance later on in the match, later on in the game. And you can even start to think about 200, 400 meter runners, guys that are gonna have really, really good speed, but they're also gonna have good endurance later on in that game. So we've gotta start to think about, all right, if we're gonna focus on strength endurance, we've gotta have long, big sets. We've gotta have sets that can go over a long period of time. So maybe we're under tension for a minute to 2 minutes. Maybe we take some finishers, we do some simple work with finishers, we do some long duration lunges, we can do some isometric work, and even on top of that, we can start to think about, if we're at the collegiate level, we're a Power 5 school, we're Johns Hopkins, we're UVA, we're somebody like Ohio State. Now we can start to even sit there and think, if I want to improve strength endurance for lacrosse, let's put our guys in the sauna 4 or 5 days a week for 20 to 30 minutes at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. That's going to improve their endurance. That's going to improve their conditioning, and it's not gonna bang them up. It's not gonna really hurt them physically. And that's gonna enable us to focus on those other 3 key elements. That's gonna take us to that 3rd key element. And that 3rd key element is gonna be focusing on mobility, okay? And when we watch lacrosse, watch how many crazy movements there's going to be. There's got to be mobility in the entire body. We've got to be focusing on hip mobility, knee mobility, ankle mobility, thoracic extension, thoracic mobility. There's a lot of thoracic rotation in the sport. So we've got to be able to move really, really freely in a lot of different planes. So it's not just sitting there and going like, all right, we've got to passively be flexible. We have to have a little bit more focus on these specific joints. But what we've got to do is we actually have to train high speed mobility. If we can train high speed mobility with thoracic rotation, now that's going to help our shot speed increase drastically. If we can train rotational speed, that's going to help us be a little bit more mobile in our lower back, and that's going to help our shot speed. That's going to help how well we make contact with specific players. If we train our hip mobility, now we can make better cuts. We can cut better when we're on the crease and we're trying to set up a shot or a really effective pass. Now, the other key factor too is that if we're rotating and we're changing hands with the stick, we have to have mobility in our upper body, right? So this is a really key concept, is that if we're doing things like power snatches or lunges with a plate overhead, or we're doing side medicine ball work that's going to help us with that trunk rotation, and we're doing long-legged single leg squats, and we're doing Cossack squats, now we're going to drastically improve our hip mobility. And that's another key factor, is that now when we're working on our mobility in our upper body and in our hips and in our knees and our ankles, that's going to lead us into that second key factor. That second key factor is going to be focusing on dynamic trunk control. If you are in a sport where you're holding an object when you're running full speed, and you have to cut, and you have to utilize skills, you have to focus on dynamic trunk control. That has to be broken down and placed into your programming, into your periodization. And if we're talking about lacrosse, we're gonna be running full speed with a stick. We've gotta focus on making that trunk stable. And then on top of that, we've got a sport that's very, very high contact, especially for the men. So lacrosse is extremely high contact. When you make contact with someone that feels like a brick wall, if you're a wrestler and you go in and you make contact and you're going for a collar tie, the guys that feel really, really strong are the guys that have a very stable trunk. And it's the exact same case when we're talking about contact in lacrosse. If I make contact with an opponent in lacrosse and he doesn't move, it's because he has dynamic trunk control. He knows how to flex his entire trunk and absorb that energy. And then he can absorb that energy and bring it back to you. That's what makes him feel so strong and so sturdy. So if we can factor different movements, like a power snatch, like aggressive movements that are gonna improve that dynamic trunk control, if we can get to a plate overhead in a hip lock, if we can get through various planes, a dumbbell snatch, a rotating dumbbell snatch into a hip lock, now we can train the hips in tune with that trunk control. What else will that improve? That's going to lead to that number one key element, and that's going to be speed. If we have lacrosse players that are constantly being trained properly, and they're being trained like a free safety, like a strong safety, let's improve their speed with unilateral work, some single leg squats, some step ups, some explosive lunges, some explosive dumbbell single leg snatches. Now with some unilateral plyometrics. Now we can sit there and take away all these different pieces and say, all right, that number one key element for lacrosse is going to be speed. But it doesn't mean anything if we're not utilizing dynamic trunk control, if we don't focus on mobility, especially hip and thoracic rotation. And it doesn't mean anything if late in the game we have no strength endurance to provide a foundation for that top end speed. So we've got to sit there and start to piece together all of these factors. We know that if someone is extremely fast on the field and they can see the field because of their dynamic trunk control, they can see where they need to make the next move, the next pass, the next read. They can see what the defensive scheme is in front of them. Now they can make a better decision for where they need to go with the ball, where they need to go with the next pass or the next shot. And it all goes back to enabling their body to operate at this extremely high level while their cognitive ability is operating at full tilt. So now we train this complete total machine with those four key aspects, and then we let the skill work take over that we're doing during practice. So utilize all four of these key elements to enhance your lacrosse-based training. And if you need help with a program, you're sitting there going, I don't know where to start with speed-based training and then bring in dynamic trunk control. I've never even heard dynamic trunk control. And then on top of that, strength endurance. If this sounds like something that's extremely challenging, we've put together a full program to enhance your strength training specifically for lacrosse. You can click on the link down below, head over to garagestrength.com, and you can pick up our strength training for lacrosse program to help you dominate out on the field. And if you want more content, more videos around sports performance-based training, around lacrosse-based training, click on this card right here. Until next time, guys, peace.